Well, the UN Secretary General, that's Antonio Guterres, has invoked his most powerful diplomatic tool, known as Article 99, to stop Israel's killing of Palestinians in Gaza. He's directing the Security Council to discuss the humanitarian catastrophe and is calling on an urgent ceasefire. Israel dismissed the move as a new moral low and said that Mr. Guterres should resign. Meanwhile, the UN's refugee chief renewed his call for an immediate ceasefire and said an exodus of Palestinians from Gaza into other countries in the region would be catastrophic.
I hope that there will not be a regional exodus of Palestinians. One should never forget that 2/3 of the population of Gaza are already refugees from the original conflict in the 40s and 50s, in the 1949 conflict. And that would be an additional burden on the refugee population, on the Palestinian population, and on the region. So it's very, very important to address this issue to prevent an exodus that will be really catastrophic. I think the priority is to go back to a pause and hopefully followed by humanitarian ceasefire and even more stable cessation of hostilities, and at the same time increase the amount of assistance that enters the Gaza Strip. Palestinian people are at the moment the victim of this military action, and 16,000 have died, and this is why it has to end as soon as possible. I think this is the outcome that we should all be working on.
Now, for more on this war, let's cross live to Tel Aviv and speak with Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic. Karl, good to see you. Thanks for joining us on Newsday. Israel says targeting and killing the Hamas leadership is a key goal in eliminating Hamas in Gaza. How realistic is this?
That's a good question. It's because, since the very beginning of the war, Israel has made no secret that its primary objective, or among them, to eliminate Hamas leadership and dismantling their infrastructure in Gaza. It depended on their ability to find, target, and to ultimately kill the leadership. That's Yahya Sinwar, who was the mastermind behind the October 7th massacres and attacks, and Mohammed Deif, his right-hand man, the number 2. That's why, for the Israelis, Khan Yunis, this could be the turning point, the decisive battle of the war, because not only is that their hometown, but that's where they've been based. And after northern Gaza almost basically fell to the Israelis, only except for a few pockets of resistance, that's where they fled to. They fled to Khan Yunis. And only yesterday we got cryptic comments saying that, well, we've surrounded his home, but we know he's not there. But they're also saying that we know he's not above ground. So it's a way of saying that we know where he's not, but we're not going to tell you where we think he is. And it's most likely that he's underground in that network of tunnels that spans more than 300 miles beneath Gaza. But to kill him, and also Mohammed Deif, that would be a huge psychological blow. It would be the equivalent of, the U.S., going after and killing Osama bin Laden, who is the architect of 9/11, or going after the leaders of Islamic State, al-Baghdadi, for example. But then that's the point. It's a psychological blow, but that does not kill the effect of Hamas. I think what you need to consider is this. Hamas has been in power for 15, 16 years, so they've been able to embed themselves in Gaza society. They control, in fact, the government service. You have about 100,000 people at least working for the Gaza Authority in Gaza on the payroll of Hamas because of money funded by Qatar. So, for example, that's one reason why the head of the Shifa hospital, it turns out, according to Israeli media, that he was a Hamas member. So, by killing, Sinwar or Deif, that's just maybe the first step, because then some are saying that you have to have what you had after World War II or after the Iraq War, a denazification program or the de-Ba'athist program, or in Gaza's case, a de-Hamasification program, because you have so many people now who've been under the sway, under the thrall of Hamas. So that would be the next step. But that's why, the clock is ticking. That's why there's so much urgency to find, locate, and ultimately kill these leaders to really kind of move on to the next phase, which is really to begin the process of demystifying and de-Hamasifying, as they call it, of the rest of the population in Gaza.
Right now, while we're talking about the different phases of this war, what does Israel's decision to allow more fuel into Gaza mean for the war in general and controlling the humanitarian crisis?
Well, it's very interesting because, fuel has always been a very sore point for the Israelis because they maintain that a lot of the fuel that gets sent into Gaza is simply diverted by Hamas for its own uses. That fuel is used to power electricity, supply oxygen to its network of underground tunnels. They're saying that it's not being used for the people. That's why the hardliners in the cabinet didn't want to supply anymore. They voted against it, as a matter of fact. That's why initially they only wanted to give at most 60,000 liters a day. But the U.S. really is now putting a lot of pressure on the Israeli government because of international outcry, because of how important electricity is for hospitals, pumping stations, and sewage treatment plants. And so that's why at first, they only want to give 60,000 liters a day. Now they've agreed to provide 120,000 liters a day. 180,000 was what the U.S. was requesting. But again, to put things in a broader context, the lack of electricity has just impacted Gazan society so much, an entire collapse of Gaza society, because you really have spiraling out of control hunger, infant mortality, even psychological trauma, just horrifying reports coming in from the charity care that because of lack of medical care and hunger and hospitals, mothers give birth only to see their babies die because there's no power, meaning no fuel for the incubators. Those kinds of things are happening. Again, because of lack of electricity, and cooking gas, you don't have bakeries or the ability to cook and prepare food. So so mothers are skipping their meals so that their children can eat. And because of just the lack of food and the hunger, now you have children who are not even eating or speaking because they're so traumatized by all that's happening. So in that respect, by providing fuel, which will then provide electricity, that's a key part to helping mitigate this humanitarian crisis, and also, for that matter, just simply having fuel for the sewage treatment plants, because already in those overcrowded places, those shelters, you're already having infectious diseases spreading, especially in cases where they're now saying that nearly 200 people have access to a single toilet. I mean, that's just how out of control it is.
Well said, Karl. Now, the Secretary General is invoking Article 99. That is rarely used by the UN because of this war and its threat to security. How does it work, and do you think it will be effective?
Well, it's a tricky mechanism. First of all, you're right, it's rarely been used. In fact, it has not been used for decades, and when it has been used, it's really been with mixed results. What it does, it's the Secretary General, he's calling the Security Council to meet and decide to pass a resolution that would be a binding resolution because there's a threat to peace and security. What that's saying is that because of what's happening now in the Gaza war, you have a real threat of this conflict spreading because of other countries getting involved, ranging from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and now Yemen. That's a real possibility. And if the Security Council can agree to pass a resolution, meaning no country vetoes it, in terms of the permanent members, then there's a possibility of a peacekeeping force being created. The first time it was used back in 1960 when Dag Hammarskjöld was the Secretary General, and it was used in the Congo to prevent the outbreaks of violence in the Congo. It was a 20,000-person peacekeeping force. The last time it was used was during the Lebanon War in the 1980s, 1989. Again, that was after the worst of the fighting had happened, but nonetheless, a UN peacekeeping force was created. But there was a real big miss when it was never invoked, and that was the Rwanda genocides back in 1994. Many are saying, why wasn't that article invoked then? So that's why, if it is, they meet to decide as early as tomorrow, Friday. Again, there's the prospect of the U.S. vetoing it or Russia vetoing it. But if it does pass, you're talking about possibly the creation of a peacekeeping force, which is the last thing that Israel wants to see.
All right, Special Correspondent Karl Bostic, thank you so much for your contribution. As always, live from Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for your time.